All right, so I'm going to get us started with a word of prayer, and then we got a wild ride. We got 2 books to cover tonight, so let's do this. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that you're the God who speaks, that again and again we can come back to your word and we can find new truth and we can learn more about you and we can see the story of how you have worked in both the good times and the bad times. We can see the truth about you, the truth about ourselves, and that can set us free. And so we're so thankful that we get to look at your word tonight, that we get to spend a couple of hours digging into what you said and hearing from you. And so that's what we ask for. We invite you to speak to us. We ask that you, by the presence of your Spirit, would be moving in us, through us, around us, that you would be a part of this, that this wouldn't just be interesting ideas, this wouldn't just be more facts for us to know, but this would be transformative for us, that we would be made more like your Son as we read and we study today. We pray this in his name. Amen. All right, so we are talking about the books Judges and Ruth, 2 books in the Old Testament. And the reason we're doing that is because we are reading the book of Judges right now in our Bible Savvy reading plan. We just started this week in the book of Judges, and we're going to be reading Judges right up through Christmas. And then we give you a nice little present there at the end of going through the kind of deep darkness of Judges. You get to read Ruth right there, like at Christmas. It's your present. It's wonderful and beautiful. It is one of the sweetest, most glorious books in the Bible. And so we're going to cover both of those today, and they're actually linked together, but we'll get into what that means in a little bit. In terms of resources when we're talking about Bible Savvy, a couple of things I want to highlight for you. One is this year, all the rest of the sermon series that we're doing at Christ Community are all connected to Bible Savvy. So when you come on the weekend, you will hear a sermon about one of the passages that if you're reading Bible Savvy, you will read in the subsequent week. The other resource for that is the Bible Savvy podcast. We will be talking about one of the passages you read that week that is not one of the ones we're preaching on, which means if you are really digging in, you can get help 2 days a week, okay? Like what teacher ever gave you that kind of study guide, all right? So this is what we got. So we got a lot going on there. BibleSavvy.com is where you can find all the kind of background context resources and everything else, and you can follow us on Twitter and all the rest. But those are the resources. All of this is to help us dig into God's Word, understand it, apply it, and enjoy it too, okay? So we're throwing that in there. I don't know if you listen to the Bible Savvy podcast. I insisted that we have the word enjoy in our tagline because this is supposed to be really, really fun. It's not a duty, it's a delight, right? So we're talking about the book of Judges and Ruth, but I want to hear why you guys are here, okay? So at your tables or in chat, I want you to just share, why'd you come to this workshop? And what are you hoping to get out of it? Okay, just go around your table, share that. We'll jump back in. Now here's the next question I want you to answer. Based on what you know right now, and you don't have to know anything really, so you can make this up. You can say whatever you want. Sum up the theme of Judges in a sentence. Based on what you know. You don't have to be right. Just share it around your table. All right. Let's see if anybody's willing to venture. How would you sum up Judges based on what you know, even before we talked about it? What might you say? No king. Okay, so that's not even a full sentence. That's like barely a phrase. 2 whole words. No king. All right, we're going to see how that turns out. What else?
I did a phrase too.
A phrase.
Failure of mankind.
The failure of mankind. Okay, yeah. So the failure. All right, that's might be a key word to identify here. Any of you just like, I don't know. Yeah, seriously, okay, because the book of Judges is one of those books that, to be honest, like you might hear, if you read like a kid's Bible, a couple of random stories from, but it is not like a super popular book for people to be like, this is what I'm digging into right now. If you aren't doing something like reading through the Bible, doing a Bible Savvy kind of schedule, it's one of the ones that is not like you're not gravitating to, okay? So this is, and part of the reason is because it's about failure. It's about some things that are a bit heavy, and so there's more pleasant things to go to sometimes. But there's a really important reason why we've got the book of Judges, and hopefully we'll understand that as we go through it. So let me give you a little context for the book of Judges, okay? Here's where it's situated in the Bible, all right? Like if you're looking at the Hebrew Bible, if you're looking at the Old Testament, the way the Hebrew canon, okay, so when you open up the Bible in English, there's a certain order of all the books. Like there's kind of a typical order that we put it in. If you pull it up on a Bible app, it's just an alphabetical order. It kind of messes with you. But if you look at it in a physical book, it's in a certain order. But if you actually pulled it up in a Hebrew Bible, it would be in a different order than we typically put it in an English Bible. And that Hebrew order is actually really telling to how it's organized, okay? Now, in this case, it is not like completely randomly different, but it's helpful to see it kind of where it falls in the divisions of the Hebrew Bible. It'll give you some insight. So the first 5 books of the Bible are called the Torah. Those are the books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so these are the kind of the foundational books that they're like the operating system of the Bible. It's like the ones that say this is how this is the story of the people of God in their history, and sort of the laws and the system on which the whole thing runs, okay? It kind of gives you the background information about all of the institutions of Israel and the traditions and laws and all sorts of things. So that's the book that all throughout the Bible, like even in Jesus' time, if they're referring to going back to Scripture, that is like the number one place that they're going to. It's like the most quoted things in the New Testament, okay? So the Torah. Then there are the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im is the prophets. Now, when we hear the word prophet, we think of a certain set of books which do not include, which are not all of the prophets that are in the Hebrew Bible. So the Hebrew Bible actually has 2 sets of prophets. One they call the former prophets, and one they call the latter prophets, okay? So the latter prophets are the ones that we usually call the prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the book of the 12, which is all the little ones, the Haggai and Zephaniah and all the kind of random weird ones. Like they're all like booked in one thing. The former prophets, though, this is where it's interesting, are the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And they are lumped together because here's the idea. They're saying this is the history of God's people from when they got into the land to when they went out of the land, told from the perspective of God. Told from the perspective of the prophets, interpreted through a God's eye view. And so they're all put together saying this is you can sort of think of the former prophets as God's perspective on the past, and the latter prophets is God's perspective on the future, or the present and the future, okay? So this is what you've got in these 2 books, and they're grouped together in the Hebrew Bible. The Ketuvim are the writings, which is kind of the grab bag of the Old Testament writing. So it's got the Psalms, it's got the wisdom books, it's got some books like Ruth and Lamentations, some of these short ones that are kind of thrown in there, and then all the things that were written after Israel was in exile: Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. Okay, here's how this breaks down. In Bible Savvy, we read the Torah in the first year. We read the former prophets this year, okay, the second year of the cycle. We read the latter prophets in the 3rd year, and then the post-exilic ones in the 4th year, and all those other ones we kind of sprinkle throughout, okay? So that's what we're doing. So this year, as we're reading, we're in the middle of this story of Israel's history. We usually call this the historical books, but I do think it's interesting to call it the former prophets. Let me give you some context in terms of time, okay? So this is when we're talking about. I love to use this kind of simple little thing, because I don't know if you were in history class, if you're the person who's like, they made me memorize all of these dates, and as soon as I crammed for the test, they were gone, and I have no idea. You know what I mean? It's just like Abraham Lincoln, Alexander the Great, I don't know what order they go in. It's like they're just all back there, right? So here, this really helps you when you're talking about the Bible to organize it a little bit. And I actually draw it kind of like this, okay? So it's a W here. So you can think of this as the 5 major turning points of the Bible, all right? We start with Adam, okay? It all starts with him. Things are at the top, like things are good, right? Very quickly falls apart, right? Abraham, down here at the bottom, when things are at their worst, God calls a man named Abraham to start a rescue project. And things start to kind of make some progress towards the way things are supposed to be. And along the way, you get Moses. Put him on here. He's not on one of the points, but he's very important. And then you end up culminating with David, okay? David is kind of the high point, the king who was God's chosen king. This is the guy, it got close to the way things are supposed to be. But it very quickly fell apart after David. It turns out not to be the Messiah. And so it falls apart, and the people of God go into exile. They lose all of the things they had gained under Abraham, Moses, and David. It falls apart, and they're just kicked out of the land. They lose their king, they lose their land, they lose everything. But here's what happens. During the exile, God says, I'm not done. It looks like this should be the story. Okay, we lost it. But then what God does is he sends prophets to say there's something better coming. It looks like it all fell apart, but I promise you there's a future. And if you guys know the end of the story, that future is Jesus, okay? I'm not going to explain all of this. This is the big picture story of the Old Testament. But here's what's helpful about this. These major characters or events are roughly, my Old Testament professors would like critique me on this, but roughly 500 years apart. So if you are reading a book of the Bible, if you can figure out in between which of these major characters they are, you know roughly where it falls in the timeline, okay? So that's why I've got it spaced like that on the screen here. So Abraham, Moses, David, exile, Jesus. The books we are talking about are a little bit after Moses, okay? So the book of Joshua, Moses dies, and it starts with the death of Moses. The last book of the latter prophets ends with the exile. That's where the story ends. It goes from going into the land to leaving the land, and they all happen in between. Joshua, Judges, the story of Ruth, Samuel, and Kings. That's what's in between there. So you're talking about a little less than 1,000 years of history here. So this is where we're at. The book of Judges is in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. Those are for all you history geeks who are like, oh, I want to know about the weaponry and what it's made out of. The reason that might be interesting to know is that some of the challenges that they face, Israel faces with their enemies, is because some of their enemies have developed iron weapons, which are far superior to the bronze ones that they have. So when sometimes they talk about chariots or different kinds of swords and things like that, and you're like, why are they talking about this? It's because they're saying they have the latest military technology. Like they have the stealth fighter, they have the new warship, they've got the thing that is it's the nuclear bomb, it's the thing that's intimidating everybody. And so they're looking at that and saying we're still stuck in the Bronze Age. They don't know it's the Bronze Age, but they're like they're advancing and we're staying behind. So this is where we're at in time. Here's the interesting thing. That's when the events of the story happen, but we've got to talk about when the story was written because it changes the perspective. Okay, so the writing of the book of Judges happens, we don't know exactly when, okay? It could have happened as early as the prophet Samuel, okay, during the time of the talked about in the story of Samuel, maybe early into the kingship, but it has to be at least that far because the events of the book go up to just about that time, to a little bit after the exile. So it could have been written at any point in there. Most likely what happened is some of the stories were written down in some form, but then someone later on who is looking back at this entire period of history is compiling these stories, the stories of Joshua and Judges and Samuel and Kings, and getting some writings that came from the past and putting them together in this collection to give this perspective of we're looking back after everything has fallen apart and asking the question, what went wrong? So part of the book of Judges is someone in the later part of Israel's history looking back and saying, can we tell an honest account of how things failed? And this is one of the stories we've got to tell if we're really going to understand that. And so the book of Judges is this like honest, you can almost think of it as like, okay, this is a sad story. I just had a friend who broke up with his fiance. Like it was a relationship that was unhealthy in a number of ways, but he's reeling from that. So now in the time after that, he's looking back and saying, let me give an honest account of how that relationship fell apart. Like I need to understand my part, I need to understand her part, I need to understand what factors went in so that I can move forward into the future and not repeat those same things. You ever had that kind of thing in your life, right? This is Israel as a nation trying to give an honest account saying, what are the lessons learned from our time of failure? Okay? So, this is where we're at. Who is the author? Okay, technically, the book is anonymous. Okay, this is actually true for most of the Old Testament books. They didn't sign their name. That was not an ancient custom. It was not like publishing today where you need to sort of have your name on it so that you get credit for it and you get quoted and whatever. They didn't care about that. These were records kept for groups of people, not for individuals to kind of get famous or make money. So they're not signed. We don't know who wrote it. There is a tradition that goes back to the rabbis, and they said maybe Samuel wrote it. Because Samuel is a great hero that comes after these stories, so maybe he wrote it. And so that's kind of been a traditional answer. The problem with that is it could be possible that he wrote them. He was alive after the time of the story, so he could have written them down. But there's nothing in the text to give us that indication. And the tradition that we have of the rabbis who said that is like 1,000 years after the books would have been written. So like they're almost as much guessing as we would be, just to say, who's a really, like a great person who would, do this. They're sort of looking back and saying, well, it might be Samuel. So it's a bit speculative. We don't know that. And like I said, it's pretty clear that the collection of books that we have was put together much after the life of Samuel, because the person who wrote the book of Judges makes little comments saying, this is what that city is called now. Or like little things that reference things that haven't happened in the time of Judges that seem to have happened even after the time of Samuel. So there's either someone came through and kind of put those little editorial remarks in, or it was written by someone later. So the standard answer to say is this was written by someone who was among the prophets. I mean, that's where it falls in the Hebrew Bible, is these former prophets, someone looking back with God's perspective and saying, let me tell the story of Israel from an honest interpretation. So the answer is we don't know, but that gives you a little bit of the speculation. Context, setting. Okay. You guys like maps? I like maps, okay? I won the geography bee when I was in 6th grade, so I love maps. So let me give you a simple map of Israel. If you flip to the back of like a good Bible, they'll often have maps, but sometimes even those are a little bit overwhelming, okay? So let me break it down to the very most simple version I can give you that will still help, all right? So this is Israel. Okay. And I know it doesn't look like Israel, but this is Israel, okay? This is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the land of Israel. This is the Dead Sea. This is the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't called that at the time, but it's what we mostly know it as. And this is the Jordan River right here, all right? So this is the basic geography. The land of Israel is right here. It's roughly the size of Chicagoland. So when you're thinking about a country, we think of like big, long, wide open spaces. This is a place that like you could travel across fairly easily in terms of the amount of space that it took up. All right, even if you're not in a car, it's not super huge. So this is where Israel is. And in the book of Judges, you're going to get a few different regions that might be helpful to know. In the southern part, there is a place that we might call the hill country. And this is where Judah was and where eventually the city of Jerusalem would be. So it's worth knowing as you're reading the Bible. When you see the hill country, kind of talking about that area. Bethlehem is also in the hill country areas. So like when you hear that, some of the action that you know of happens in the hill country. Up here is kind of the Galilee area, and there's kind of a coastal plain down here that's lower lands. And then around Israel are a whole bunch of nations, okay, these other people groups that are major factors in the book of Judges. Now, when we read the people groups, they're often just like, it's just the Moabites and the Canaanites and the Mosquitobites and the Trilobites and the Megabites and all the things, right? So here's what we got. I will give you just kind of a little scheme so you can say, oh, when I see that, I at least know where they are. So like, it'd be like reading the news and being like, is Canada north, south, east, or west? Like, just here we go, okay? So starting from the top. This would be Ammon, the place that we now call Syria. It was also called Syria in ancient times as well. In the translation we have, in the NIV, it's translated Ammon. Sometimes some translations will say Syria, okay? Then we get, let me get it right. Then we get, this is Aram, then Ammon, then Moab, then Edom. Okay, so you got Moab and Edom are going to come into play. Moab is one of the people that threaten them. And then way down here, you have Midian, okay? They're like way down south. So, and the Philistines are right here on the coast. Okay, so this is the scene that we've got. Imagine you're Israel, not that big of a country, surrounded by enemies on all sides. This is the precarious situation that Israel is in. Now, there are some big bad guys down here. There's Egypt. There's a bunch of empires over that way that we're not going to talk about today. But this is a place where they are vulnerable, okay? And it's a valuable land because if you want to travel from Egypt to anywhere else, which is kind of like a massive trade route, this is a great way to go. Like out here, There's desert and wilderness and whatever, but there's a nice plain here that you can kind of go through. And so people want that country. Moab, not a great place for growing crops, but over here, you got some good places for growing crops. So there are some things that are desirable, and they're surrounded by enemies, which is why they're always being threatened in the book of Judges. All right? So this is kind of the scene that we got. Let's talk about the big ideas, the big themes in the book, okay? When you're reading, sometimes you can get lost in the details, but if you can grab onto a few themes as you're reading through, it makes much more sense as we go. First is this, the judges, okay? Who are the judges? When we hear the word judge, this is what we picture, right? Person in a robe, gavel, making decisions, guilty, whatever, like that's what we think of as a judge. This is essentially like false on every account when you read the book of Judges. When you see the word judge, do not think of hardly anything like this kind of judge, okay? A judge in the book of Judges is a spontaneous military leader who arose in a time of need to deliver Israel. So don't think Judge Judy, think William Wallace, okay? Like think like someone who's going to rise up and be a freedom fighter for a group of people that have been oppressed. That's what a judge is. There are not judges all the time. It's not like, one judge dies, we need to elect a new one, or the son of the judge needs to become the judge. It's in times of need that they get a judge. It's not like the king or a priest or something where you always got to have one. Judges kind of come up when the need arises. They're military focused. These are generals. They are not related to kind of the establishment of like the tabernacle or the temple. It's not like they're not religious leaders. In fact, even though the reason they are needed is a spiritual reason, most of the judges, when you read this, you will realize they're not calling anybody to any spiritual anything. Like there are a few of them that kind of touch on some of Israel's religious life, but most of them, they're just like, we're at a battle, I'm going to go fight. Like it's like they're not like spiritual leaders in most respects. And they weren't necessarily expected to be that way, okay? So when you read this and you're like, why aren't they preaching? Why aren't they telling people the truth about God? Why aren't they leading people in worship? It's because that's not what they were there for. They were there to beat back an army. They had basically no civil function. There are a few places where they were settling disputes. So we recently, like last week, Jim preached about Deborah. And there are times when she was settling disputes, but that was in her role more as a prophet than as a judge. Okay, so she was a spiritual leader, but she also happened to be a judge who was called up to raise an army. So in those respects, they're really not what we typically think of as the leadership either of a modern country or ancient Israel. And some of them are not even national leaders. They're just raised up for a few tribes to lead them into a battle to clear out that part of Israel. So you got to think of them as kind of spontaneous heroes for this. Here are three major themes in the book of Judges. You will want to pay attention to these. The first one is the cycle, okay? To help you understand what the cycle is, I'm going to actually have you look at a passage of Scripture. So if you've got a Bible, go ahead and turn to Judges chapter 2. And at your table, I want you to read Judges 2, 10 through 19 out loud. And then I want you to write down the steps in the pattern that it describes. Judges 2 is kind of an overview of the book, kind of a summary of the kind of pattern that goes on. I want you to read it, and I want you to write down that pattern based on what you read. If you are watching online, if you're with someone, I want you to do that with that person. If you are not with someone, I still want you to do it, okay? So you can read this and jot down the pattern that's there, and we'll compare notes when we're done, okay? So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. All right. How would you guys describe the pattern? There's probably a few different ways to do it, so some of you probably have come up with some good ways to describe. What's the rhythm they got into? Yeah.
So, starting with a description of a generation, so the next generation of children didn't listen to their fathers, and they failed the Lord, they worshipped idols.
Okay, so they didn't listen to the previous generation, and then they worshipped idols. Okay, so God gets angry, and God hands them over to invading people, to destruction.
And then the Lord went against them, but then saved them.
Okay, so God's against them, but then He rescues them.
Right.
Okay.
And then he saved them with the judges, so saving them again, but then they they start worshiping idols for whatever reason at that point. They anger the Lord, who then saves them, and they come back even more. It's like a downward spiral.
Yeah, so yeah, you're seeing the repeating. So they worship idols. God gets angry and hands them over to the outside invaders. Then God rescues them. They don't seem to learn their lesson, and then they fall back into worshiping idols, and he's angry again. Okay, anything that anybody else would add? Yeah. There's peace for a little while. Yeah, so you get these little sections between the rescue and the rebellion, you get a little bit of time of peace, right? Doesn't last, though. They quickly forget. There seems to be, you mentioned, a disconnect between one generation kind of passing on what they learned to the next generation. It starts right from the very beginning. The first generation is like, we don't remember what they knew. Yeah.
Do they know why, as the generations go on, do they know less and less about why they're being saved or how they're saved?
So the question was, do the generations kind of know less and less and less? And I think as we start to tell the story, we'll come back and I think you'll see kind of how the knowledge of God works, like how it progresses in the cycle. But it is definitely true to say that this is not just a circle; this is a downward spiral. Okay, so this is not going well. Like it's progressively getting worse and worse, and the Book of Judges emphasizes that fact. Yeah. So let me give you kind of one of the kind of standard ways to describe this cycle. There's peace for a little while. Then there is sin, and we'll talk about what that sin looks like. Then they are oppressed. Some outside group comes in. God, sends, either way you put it, a group to come in and make life miserable for Israel. Then at some point they repent. Now I use the word repent. I probably should have put it in quotes, because what really happens is they say, I don't like this anymore. Okay, so sometimes it's like, you know the difference between like when a kid like feels bad that they did something wrong and they feel bad that they got punished. Like sometimes it looks really similar, and either way they might be saying sorry, but like there's a difference between the two. As you read, you should kind of ask the question: Are they really sorry? Or are they just sorry that the punishment's happening? But then God rescues them. That's when the judge shows up. Comes and kicks out the oppressors, and then there's a time of peace again, which then leads to sin and oppression and so on, and around and around and around, swirling down the toilet bowl as we go. Okay, so this is the cycle. This is probably the most prominent thing you're going to get out of the Book of Judges. If you remember nothing about the Book of Judges, years to come, if someone asks you about it, this is a fantastic summary of the book. Okay. The next theme is what I might call the Canaanization of Israel. Now that sounds like super sophisticated. Here's what it means. They're becoming like all the people around them. Okay, they're in the land of Canaan. Okay, before this was called the land of Israel, it's the land of Canaan. And there are people groups that live there before Israel showed up. And God in the book of Joshua said, you need to clear them out, not because he hated them as a people group, but because they were so committed to idolatrous practices and injustice and all sorts of evil things that God said, you cannot live in a land that is dedicated to serve me as a people who are holy to me, and have these people groups continue to be there and have you expect to remain faithful and holy. You are going to get sucked into all the things they're doing. I've decided to judge them, and I want you to live differently than them. You are going to be a contrast culture to all the cultures around you. You are going to be different. But here's what actually happens when they go into the land. They don't drive out the people. They're supposed to, but they don't. They don't actually deal with the people there. So when you read the first chapter of Judges, what you get is God saying, all right, next phase, like Joshua's, they didn't really finish the job, but you guys can go do it. And they kind of do a little bit. And then it lists off tribe after tribe after tribe after tribe that did not actually drive out the people from their land. And it says things like, and so they lived among the people of Canaan. And so it's like this statement, like it's like it could just be a matter of fact of like, well, these are the people around us. It's like a more profound thing of, they started like living in this world, in this culture, in this place, absorbing what was going on there. And even before you read the rest of the book, you start to get the feeling of like, oh no, this is not going to go well. And the book essentially describes Israel's descent to becoming exactly like the people that they were supposed to replace. Okay? So this is what you end up seeing. You end up seeing the primary problem is idolatry. They turn away from worshiping God and they worship the gods of the people around them. So you get the Baals, the Baals, Astra, you get some of these different gods, and they are worshiping them. And here's the interesting thing, is most of the time, Israel is not saying, I'm ditching God, I'm ditching the Lord, and I'm going to worship this. It's usually just like, let's also have this. It's like, we got God, we also have Baal, we also have Astra, we got these other things. And basically what they were doing is they're saying, these other deities are like gods of the harvest or fertility or things that were very important to them. They're saying, these are valuable for us. We need our crops to do well. We need our animals to go well. We need sons and daughters. We need these things. These are important for our survival and our livelihood. And so it looks like all the people around us have found some way to, get these things blessed. And so it basically, as a way of sort of like gaming the system, they're like, well, you know what? We'll kind of put our chips on God. We'll also put some chips on these guys, and hopefully it'll pay out for us. Right? We'll hedge our bets, and we'll get a little of all the good stuff, and we'll do all right. But God is a husband, and Israel is his bride. And so to say, you know what, I'm going to live with my husband, but I'm also going to sleep around, is not acceptable. Like it's not something that God's going to tolerate. And so this is the primary sin. It's the one that leads to all the other ones. The next major sin, and when you're reading through the Bible, these two are always kind of like the twin pairing, okay? Idolatry is sin, a vertical sin against God. Injustice is a horizontal sin against the people around you. And so you see in the book of Judges more and more injustice. And the way to notice this is to look at the groups of people that would have been most vulnerable in an ancient society. The particular group to look at in the book of Judges is women. There's actually a progression through the book of how women are treated. So early in the book, you have someone like Deborah, who is honored as a prophet and is leading the people. But as you go through, if you look at the stories of women, it gets progressively worse and worse and worse for them. In fact, the very last story of like in Judges, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is it is like the absolute like use and misuse and mistreatment and abuse of a woman. That's the like culmination of their sin. It's to show that in society, women who were not protected in the way they are in our society, who are most vulnerable, were most mistreated by the time you get to the end of this. Violence is all throughout the book. This is probably the most violent book in the Bible, and it's graphic and gross in places, and that's on purpose. Like there were times for war in the Old Testament. Like there are times when the people of Israel needed to fight, but this violence is not violence to be gloried in. Even the violence that the heroes do is sort of a like, ugh, I can't believe it came to that, and most of it is pretty awful, and you're supposed to feel that way. It's supposed to feel brutal. Like this is not the way it's supposed to be. Sexual immorality is also pervasive through the book. This is one of the things that kind of goes with some of the idolatry and injustice in the ancient world. Part of the way that women in particular were exploited was through sexual violence. But even the idolatry is tied in with some sexual practices that go into their worship. So some of this is also in there. And you also just see the appetites of people getting out of control. There's just no self-control by the time you get to the end of the story. And when you are reading about the Canaanites, even before Israel shows up, this is how, like when Moses is talking to the people about them, this is how they're described. Like the laws in Leviticus about sexuality, like one of the things it says right there at the end is, these are all the things the people in the land you're going into, this is what they do. And if you do them, you will experience the same consequences as them. So as you read this, you are supposed to weep over the fact that God's people that were chosen to be different and distinct start to look exactly like everybody around them, and it destroys them. It's just, it's ugly and gross and devastating. You should feel sick to your stomach because it exposes what it looks like when God's people say, I think what they've got is better than what God is giving us. You should feel bad as you read this. So that's the Canaanization of Israel. Third theme here. Oh, actually, let me show you the Canaanization of Israel, okay? Let me actually show you the progression here. It's in the structure of the book. First two chapters are an introduction to the book. That's what I just described. They didn't drive the people out. Then you get a series of 3 judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah. There are a few other random ones thrown in there, but these are the major ones where they actually tell the story. And then you get Gideon. This is one of the very famous stories in the book. Then you get Jephthah. Then you get Samson. Okay, so these are the major judges. So if you're reading through, these are the ones you'll remember. A few of these end up in kids' Bibles. But here's what happens. The first three are relatively good. Like you look at them and you say, hey, they're kind of doing the right thing. Like they're not super spiritual or anything, but like they're not like violating God's law left and right. Gideon, just kind of okay. Like he's one of the ones we tell his story like, yeah, and I'm going to preach on it this weekend, okay? So like, yeah, he's a hero. And he gets, in the New Testament, like, yeah, this is one of those guys we look back and say he was, God used him. But he was kind of just okay. He was a real mixed bag. Jephthah is bad. Real bad. Like sacrifice your daughter, bad. Like violent just to be violent, bad, okay? This guy, you're like, I don't see why he'd be a hero at all. And then you get to Samson, and he's worse. Samson, the guy that we put in the kids' Bibles because you're like, yeah, the boys need like a muscle man or something. It's like, no, actually, this is exactly what you don't want your boys to be like. Like God calls him from the womb. Says, you're going to be used by me. And you know what the name Samson means? Son of the sun god. So his parents are told this, the angel of the Lord shows up and says, you're going to have a baby and he's going to rescue the people. It's like, oh yeah, I know this story. This is a good story, right? They immediately name him after the sun god, not our God, but the sun god. Like, what in the world is going on with this? And then Samson basically lives his life going from woman to woman and not Israelite women. He's supposed to be there to drive out the Philistines. He just keeps hooking up with Philistines. And so he goes from woman to woman, and he just gets in fights, and he picks fights, and God uses those fights to, take care of the Philistines. But you look at Samson, and you're like, this is not righteous anger. This is like petty stuff and whatever. And by the time, at the end, he's sleeping with a Philistine, and she's like getting him to betray God, and he ends up in this weak and defeated state, and he's chained to some pillars, and he's been captive for this time, and his eyes have been plucked out, and he's in this desperate place. And when his life has fallen apart, at that moment, he prays out. Like the first time, he's like, God, just help me. And he manages to kill a bunch of Philistines while killing himself at the same time, pulling the building down on him. And you're supposed to look at that and say, not, yeah! You're supposed to say, this is what it came to. The self-destruction of a so-called hero was the only thing that could rescue Israel in their time of need. Things must have gotten really, really bad if this is the best you've got. It's not good. And you're supposed to feel that way, okay? When you get to the final section of the book, after all of the judges, it is total anarchy, okay? So you get to a part, Samson is the last judge, but there's still 4 chapters left. And so you read these 4 chapters, and it's not, there are no outside oppressors that they're dealing with. It is just the people of God devouring each other. 2 major stories are there, okay? Leviticus 19, which is probably the lowest point in the Bible. Like this might be the most horrible thing, okay? I will not tell all of it in gory detail, but it comes down to this. There's a man who is traveling, and he has his concubine with him, so his kind of half-wife, okay? This woman that he wouldn't even, go all the way with. But says, well, yeah, I'll sleep with you. And you can kind of be a, half wife, half servant, half whatever. They're traveling along, and they stop, and they go to her father. They're with him for a while. The father says, you don't want to leave. You don't want to travel right now. The man says, nah, I'm going to travel. So they go out traveling at night, which is not a good thing to do in the ancient world. You didn't do it that way. And so they go out traveling, and they end up in a town. This is a town in Israel, right? Like this is your brothers. These are the people that are like God commands. You show hospitality to the stranger. You welcome people in. You share what you have with them. They go to this town. You know what they do? Men of the town come out and they say, we want to sleep with you. Not the concubine, the man. And it sounds really similar to a story you might have heard called Sodom and Gomorrah. All the men of the town come out to gang rape a visitor. And this guy's supposed to be like one of their kinsmen. And so they're out there, we're going to attack them. So the place where they're staying, the guy who let this guy in, says, all right, here's what we'll do. You can take my daughter, and you can take his concubine, and you can do whatever you want with him. And so the town rapes the 2 women, leaves the concubine laying there dead, like on the doorstep. And the next morning, the man comes out and just like, basically, I mean, it's like he just kind of shoves her and is like, come on, get up, let's go. And she's lying there dead after being raped all night. Then what he does is, in order to prove just how horrible this was, he chops up her body into 12 parts and ships it out with messengers to all the different tribes of Israel. Saying, here's the body parts of my half-wife. Now you look at this and you're like, what's the point of that? Like, people point to that story and they say, this is what's wrong with the Bible, right? Like the violence and the gore and it's depravity. It's horrible. Why would God put that in there? Does he think this is okay? No, that's the point. Like, this is how bad it gets. Over and over and over again, as people rebel against God. This is what it really looks like. The interesting thing about this is, at this low point, here's what you got. You have a man who uses his wife's body to protect himself. He sacrifices his wife to protect himself. Let me give you a preview. You know what the good news is? The climax of the story of the Bible is about a man who sacrifices his body to preserve the body of his wife, to preserve his bride. It's about Jesus sacrificing himself for the one that he loves rather than sacrificing the one that he loves to save himself. But this is the low point. This is where human nature goes. The second story in there is basically a civil war between different tribes. So much so that they wipe out one whole tribe, which is not supposed to happen. They don't have like they have to actually kind of repopulate the tribe by giving some of their like daughters and whatever to kind of replace the people who had died and whatever. Like it's gross. Like it's just messed up. So you end up with the people of God literally tearing themselves apart at the end. And you're supposed to read that and say, something needs to change. Let me tell you the secret of the book of Judges. The heroes are the villains. And if you don't get this, you will not get the book. The heroes are the villains. When God raises up a judge, I know this is kind of making light of this, but it's like if you watch the Marvel movies, you know the ones where they're like, hey, Loki, like you're a bad guy, but we need your help because you can get the job done. Like you watch a movie where Loki is the main character, and you say, well, he's still kind of a villain, right? It's the Suicide Squad. It's the way you get the criminals. It's Ocean's 11. It's like these are bad guys that we recruited, not because they're good, but because they'll get the job done. But if you watch it and think these are really wonderful people, you misunderstood the movie. Judges is like that like 1,000 times. When you read this, you must think, don't be like these people. Just because God used them doesn't mean he endorses the things they did. We are so used to reading the Bible saying, what can I imitate here? And if you go into this saying, who's the hero and how can I be like him? It will not go well for you, okay? So this is not that book. This is the book where you say, everybody here is a bad guy. And in fact, the book says it explicitly with a punchline. Here's the punchline. That we need a king. One of the very last verses in the book says, in those days, Israel had no king. No king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Other translations say, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They all did what they thought was good, but they had no one to lead them. None of these leaders were any good. And this is a refrain. This comes up several times, especially at the end of the book. It says it over and over again. There's no king, there's no king, there's no king. You want to know what went wrong? There's no one to lead them in doing what's right. You need a king. So you get to the end of the book, and that's where you're left. This is a tragedy. So the reason you read a book like Judges is not to get a happy ending. It's the same reason that you watch The Godfather or you read Macbeth or, like a tragedy in history. Like you don't read it because you're supposed to look at that. You're supposed to say, this is what goes wrong. Let me weep over that. Let me lament over this. Let me be warned by this because I don't want to be like that. We need a king. Now, you get to the end of the book of Judges and it's pointing to a king. And you know what king it's pointing to? Pointing to King David, okay? King David, high point of the story in the Old Testament. He's kind of the paragon. He's the guy that everybody's looking to, the leader that we've been waiting for. He's the one who finally kind of gets things, back on track. And so David is kind of the one that this is pointing to, and even in the rest of the Bible is kind of what the rest of the Bible is pointing back to, saying everybody's getting compared to David. So you keep that in mind, because an ancient Israelite would have had that in mind, an ancient Jew would have had that in mind. But as people who are followers of Jesus, we also know that David failed. He did well, but he failed pretty spectacularly in the end. And so what we're really looking at in the book of Judges is a declaration that we need a Messiah. We need David's greater son. We need the true king, the ultimate king, the one who will not do what the judges did. So the book of Judges. Okay, so this is why when Jim and I said, we're going to preach on this during Advent, it's like, what is wrong with us? We did Leviticus at Easter one year. Here's what happens, guys. We sit down in our planning meetings, and Jim's got some brilliant idea, and I go, "Hey, Jim, what if we tried this?" And it's kind of a joke. It's kind of a joke. And then he's like, "Well, maybe." And then like as we talk it through, I'm usually like, maybe we should go back to the other idea. He's like, no. And so like we get on this roll, and we're always like, we make a mess for ourselves. But here's why it's actually genius. All right, I'm going to defend our stupid idea. Advent is the time when we say the world is a dark place. There's a reason why we celebrate Christmas. We don't know when Jesus' birthday was, right? The reason we celebrate it here is because it's the darkest time of the year. It's the time when we say we need the light to break in. We need it to shine on us when it's darkest. So to read a book like Judges is actually really like authentic to Advent. It's to say in the time leading up to the celebration, when the light breaks in, we need to see just how dark it is without him. We need to say, I need a king. I need someone to show up. I need someone to rescue. And so when that baby is born in Bethlehem, which is also where King David was born, you say, this is what we needed because we were really screwing it up on our own. This is what the book of Judges does for us. We need a king. We need a king. All right, I'm going to stop here for a break. And here's what I want you to do. If you have questions about anything in the book of Judges, I can't say that I always have an answer, but I would love to hear your questions. You can write those on a card. I think we've got some cards at your table that you can do, and during the break, you can come bring them up here to the stage. If you are online, you can put those in the chat, and I will get those questions as well. I will answer the ones that I can, and we'll see if we can give some insight. But you can take a break. We'll come back, let's say, 10 after 7, or 10 after 8. I'm going to try to answer a few of these questions. I might not be able to get to all of them, but here's a question someone on chat asked. Can you define the Canaanites? Like who are they? And what does it have to do with this area over here? Okay, so Canaan is kind of the name that we give to this region right here. Okay, not this, but the one where Israel shows up. Okay, like when they're in here, this is what we call the land of Canaan until Israel goes there, and then we start calling it the land of Israel. Now, the Canaanites is one group of people that live there. If you are in the promise to Abraham, when he says, "I'm going to give you this land," he says this: "I'm going to give you the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Raphaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites," and you can just go on and on and on. So, Canaanites is one of the groups that's in there, but it's often used as a shorthand to describe all the people that lived in this region. Okay, so when we talk kind of in general, saying like the Israelites kind of were influenced by the Canaanites, what we mean is the people who are in that territory that they didn't drive out. So it might actually be the Jebusites or the Kenizzites or one of those other ones, but we kind of just use that as shorthand rather than listing off all of those things. So that's kind of what we mean. Sometimes you'll also see like Amorites thrown in there as like a summary for all of them, but it basically just means the people of the land. Now, sometimes there are other people groups, these ones around here, they were not supposed to dispossess them, okay? So these are neighbors, and they're not supposed to take over their land. That, like God, without getting into it, designated these spaces for them. And sometimes they talk about Egypt, or sometimes they talk about Babylon, or these other places as influencing them. But when they talk about the Canaanites, they're talking about like the next door neighbors who shouldn't actually live there. Okay, that's who we're talking about. So it's always a sign of their unfaithfulness if they're being influenced by one of those groups, because they shouldn't be a problem at all. Okay, so that's the Canaanites. Another question is, this is great. If the heroes are the villains in the book, why did Pastor Jim teach lessons to follow from the example of Deborah? Okay, here's the thing. Look at the chart. Okay. I'm going to go back. Yeah. Okay. They're still on that good side, all right? So you can get some lessons from Deborah, but good luck doing anything after that, okay? We're going to get a few things maybe from Gideon, but it's kind of in spite of Gideon that we're going to learn from him this week. And when we learn from Samson, in a couple of weeks here, Pastor Tim is not going to be saying be like Samson. He's going to be saying don't be like Samson. So you can learn things from them, but most of it is what not to do. But if you want to imitate someone, look that direction. If you want to, be warned by someone, start going that direction. But honestly, Deborah's like the last one you get anything good out of. So there you go. Let's see here. We've got a question. So in your opinion, okay, this is good. You guys are finding the tricky things. In your opinion, if Samson was the worst, why is he listed in Hebrews 11? Okay, Hebrews 11, if you're not familiar with that chapter, is a chapter where the author of Hebrews is like, let's remember all the people who lived by faith, because you should live by faith too. So it sounds like these are people you should be like, right? List of all sorts of people, Noah and Abraham and Moses and all these people that you're like, yeah, those sound like heroes. And then it goes through this list, and it just rattles off a bunch of people. One of them is Samson. You say, okay, so are we supposed to be like him? Here is the thing. Okay, this is like the deep logic of the Bible. If you look at any of the people in the list, even the ones that you're like, yeah, they're basically heroes, they are not. Okay, so this is getting beyond Judges. When you read the book of Judges and you find out the heroes are the villains, turns out that's true for all of the Bible. Abraham, you don't want a marriage like Abraham's. Moses, you don't want a temper like Moses. David, you don't want to be a murderer like David. Like you look at these people and you say, what gets them into the list in Hebrews 11? What gets them into the list? What's the quality they have? Faith. Now, faith is a good thing to imitate, but it is not the same thing as saying you are a good person. In fact, what it means is, I can't do it on my own. I need someone's help. I cannot make it on my own. I must depend and trust and cling to someone who is better, God. So faith is not the virtue of saying, I'm really amazing. It's the virtue of saying, I'm pretty sure I'm not. And I need someone who is amazing to carry me. Faith is the kind of anti-virtue. It's the one that says, I don't have it in myself. I throw myself on the mercy of somebody else. And so this is kind of the secret in the Bible. There's only one hero. There's only one person that you can imitate all the time. There's only one person who you can look to and say, I'm pretty sure he's all right. That's why he came. Okay? So that's kind of the trick there. It doesn't mean there aren't things to learn from some people, but it doesn't mean that that's why they're heroes. Okay? They're heroes because they trusted the one who really is the hero. Okay, this is great. So someone is referencing the story of Ehud, this guy over here. Ooh, they gave me a laser this time. Do you see that? I got a laser. Okay. Ehud. Ehud is the story that you tell to your junior high boys and your 39-year-old boys and your 5-year-old boys, okay? Because this is what happens. Ehud is sent to defeat the evil king Eglon, who is a Moabite king who is oppressing Israel. And Eglon happens to be a very large man. Now, when you read that someone is fat in the ancient world, we have different connotations to weight in our society, mostly because we can afford to get fat, almost all of us. In the ancient world, if you saw that someone was fat, it meant that they were rich. Like that's what you think. This is someone who, unlike the rest of us, has far more calories than they need. Okay, so you're supposed to look at him and say, he must be exploiting someone because most of us are halfway starving. Like the average Israelite was like, well, what did Dr. Richter say? It was like several weeks short of calories every year. You know what I mean? So like they were not getting enough. So if you see someone like Eglon and he is fat, it means he's committing some form of injustice. Okay, so Eglon is this guy, and the story is like told to kind of embarrass the guy because Ehud shows up in Eglon's chambers, and Ehud is very tricky. He is a left-handed man. Now, this is a little bit like Inigo Montoya. I just recently watched Princess Bride with my kids. I loved it. They're not old enough to get it yet. We'll try again. Okay, so Ehud is a left-handed man. And the thing is, in most ancient societies, you tried to train people out of being left-handed. That was even true even a generation or two ago. And you did not trust people who are left-handed Because if you are a right-handed person, you can see when, like this is, you're going to draw your sword, you're going to pull out your spear, you see what's happening. Left-handed person is sneaky. In Latin, the word for left-handed is sinister. That's where we get this word, because they are sneaky people. So Pastor Jim is left-handed. Make of that what you will. So here's what Ehud does. He hides his sword in a place you're not going to expect. Because normally you're going right-handed like this. He says, I'm going to strap a blade to my right thigh, and I'm going to sneak in because they're not going to see a weapon where it normally is. And so Ehud says, I got a message for you, king. And then what he does is he goes and they send out all the kind of servants out. So this gives a secret message. He leans in. Here's the message. The guy gets stabbed. The sword hilt gets absorbed by the fat. It comes out the other side, and his bowels spill out on the other side. Now, this is very gross, okay? The little boys laugh at this. There's poop all over. It stinks. The servants come by, and they don't want to go in because they're thinking, oh, he must be relieving himself. Like, we can smell it. We know what he's doing in there, so we'll not interrupt him. So they don't rescue him. They find him later dead, okay? The question, I think, I just decided to tell this story. It was more of a comment. We don't normally see this too often in the Bible. This is true. This is true. Although you would be surprised. There's some awfully embarrassing stories in there. Part of the reason it's telling this story is in some ways to embarrass this enemy king. Like there is a little bit of shaming in it that he dies in a pile of his own filth. Like there is a sort of poetic justice to this guy who is eating all of the produce of the land so that he has some and everybody else doesn't. He dies in his own waste. So there is a sense where that's told as a way to kind of gloat over this. So there you go. Let's see. Let's do one more. Okay. This one is it's almost one that I can just ask the question and you can just go, okay. What does the cycle in Judges say about the state of our country, the state of our society? Okay. Idolatry, injustice, violence, sexual immorality. Have you watched TV lately? Have you watched the news lately? I will make no comments about no public figures, all right? So we live in the world of the judges. We live in a world of the judges. Now, here's what this means for us, okay? So it's really easy to say, well, aren't you all like that? Remember what the book of Judges is. Okay, let me tell you what's most remarkable to me about the book of Judges. Most of you are probably not reading ancient political literature, right? Okay, you're not out there being like, let's read the annals of, some Babylonian emperor or some pharaoh or whatever. But if you ever do, you want to know what it's like? I'm the best, right? What do you write down in the story of your people? What do you write? The battles you won, and the money you have, and the buildings you built, and all of the things that you're so much better than everybody else about. That's what you write. That's the story of any country. You know what I mean? You start to tell the dirt about your country. Oh, no. We don't publish that stuff. But when you read the national writing of the people of God, they do not look good. This is like really embarrassing stuff to say, we're going to put this out there. Like Judges is the worst, but all of the books of the Old Testament don't really make God's people look all that great. This is the upside down thing about it. We don't, as the people of God, start by saying, look at how bad that world is. We start by saying, look at how much the world is in us. Look at how deeply we need a king, a savior. Like we've looked in the mirror, or we wouldn't be Christians. If you have not looked in the mirror and said, I'm these people, you might not be a Christian. Because that's the ticket in, right? I know that if my heart were unleashed, I'd be Samson. I'm not Jesus, I'm Samson. So I look at that, and I say, I've got something to say about the state of society, but the first thing I want to do is say, I got something to say about the state of my heart. And so I do think that we ought to weep and lament and not be fooled by the world. It does not matter what version of, your interpretation of society and the movement of culture or who you think is right or wrong in the debates we have. They're all judges, right? But so are we. And let's be the first to say it. So that's my answer to that question. Did not expect that one tonight. All right. let's keep moving, because there's a book of the Bible we want to talk about, and it is beautiful and happy and full of love. All right, so can we do a love story here, or something like a love story here? All right, here we go. We're going to talk about Ruth, but to do that, let's do this. We'll kind of segue from Judges to Ruth by asking this question: what are some of the things that make it hard to figure out the meaning of a biblical story? So when you're reading a story, not like a letter that's kind of just saying things, straightforward, God is love or whatever. Like, you're reading a story and you're like, what do I get out of this? What makes that difficult? So I'll just give you like 2 minutes around your table or in chat. Go ahead and answer that question. All right, I'm just going to give you a second here to wrap up your comment. Before I hear the answer to the question, I do feel like I want to defend some of the left-handed people. So one of my best friends, my best man at my wedding, he's left-handed. He loves to tell me that studies have been done that say that left-handed people are smarter than right-handed people, mostly because they've had to go through life that's not built for them, and so they actually get good at adapting to all these things, and they see things from different angles. And I don't know about that. I don't know. You should meet my best man. So you don't tell Jim that I just threw him under the bus as sinister. But all right. So what makes it difficult to read stories or to understand the point of biblical stories?
Understanding the context.
Yeah, the context. There's a lot of cultural things in stories. Like to really get a story, they can't tell you everything about it, the whole world and the culture. You kind of just have to assume things. So there's things that you read and you're like, I just don't even know what that means. What else? Like the actual, like sometimes the words in the biblical story. Yeah. Sometimes the words in the biblical story, you're like, I don't either know what the original was, or just the language is different than the language that we use. Yeah, sometimes it's that. Here's one of the things that I find hard. Like you read stories, and again, we talked about this already. Like sometimes you're wired to say, I'm looking for like the hero to be like. And you read a lot of stories and you're just like, I'm not even sure, like, some of these people are bad, some of these people are just doing things like, I don't feel like these are always examples, right? Sometimes they're just things that happen, and sometimes they're things that are not good that are happening. And you're like, am I supposed to imitate someone? What am I supposed to get out of a story that doesn't have a clear hero? Or one that doesn't tidy up real neat with like Aesop's fable, you know what I mean? Like, I want it to have at the end just like, and the moral of the story is, we don't get that. And so you get a lot of stories about kind of questionable people doing things that you're not sure why they're important in a cultural context that you're not familiar with. And then you say, and I'm supposed to write down an application for my life. How do I do this? Okay, so we're going to talk about how to do that. I'm going to get a little help from our friends here, the Bible Project guys, because we're an hour and a half into this, and I haven't shown a Bible Project video. If you have been in one of these classes before, you are like, what has gone wrong? Okay, so here we go. As you watch, write down some of the tips that they give for interpreting stories. That'll help you.
We're learning how to read different types of literature in the Bible, and we're going to start by talking about biblical narrative.
So narratives, in their most basic form, have characters in a setting going through a series of events. And how those events are selected and then arranged by an author, that's called the plot.
A basic plot line begins with a character in her setting. But then something new or unexpected happens, causing problems that lead up to some ultimate conflict, which is then resolved and the character finds herself changed, living in a new normal.
Now, in reading narratives, it's important to understand every scene in the context of its larger plot line. You can make the same story have a totally different message if you ignore where it occurs in the plot. This happens all the time when people read the Bible.
Really?
Yeah, take, for example, the story about Gideon. There's this well-known scene where Gideon's trying to discern whether God will help him win a battle, and he requests a sign from God.
Yeah, Gideon lays a wool fleece on the ground and asks that in the morning the fleece be wet with dew, but the ground totally dry, and God does it.
Now, if you look at this scene just by itself, what is the conflict?
How can Gideon know if he'll succeed?
And the resolution?
Test God, ask for a sign, and find out.
Yeah, and that's how many people actually read this story. and it totally misses the point because it's ignoring the larger plot line.
Really?
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. You'll get the context. The story begins with Gideon and the Israelites living in fear because they're oppressed by an invading people, the Midianites.
Got it.
Then there's the call to action. God commissions Gideon to defeat the Midianites and save Israel.
Yeah, this is shaping up to be a good story.
But then Gideon's super hesitant, so he asks God to do this magic trick, a sign, so I can know it's really you talking to me. And God stoops to his level. He gives him a sign by lighting this fire on an altar.
So Gideon's already asked for a sign.
And that's not all. In the next scene, God tells Gideon to tear down an altar to another god, but Gideon's so afraid, he does it at night.
So Gideon's skeptical and also a bit of a coward.
Then we come to the moment where Gideon's about to face the Midianites, and he's still uncertain, so he asks for another sign, the fleece. He says, I want to know if you'll save Israel by my hand.
And God gives him that sign.
And he's still uncertain, so he asks for even one more sign, which is just a variation of the previous sign.
Okay, so Gideon's asking for way too many signs.
Exactly. In the larger context, it's clear the plot conflict is not how can Gideon discern the mysterious will of God. The real conflict is, when will this guy get his act together and start trusting God?
Okay, so then what's the resolution?
We have to keep reading. So Gideon gathers this huge army, 30,000 soldiers to fight the Midianites, and God says, no, way too many men. He whittles the army down to 300.
Why would he do that?
Well, Gideon's been testing God, so now God returns the favor. He tells Gideon to arm these 300 soldiers with trumpets and torches, and then surround the Midianites at night and make all this noise in the hills, which sounds ridiculous, but Gideon does it. And the noise scares the Midianites into this frenzy. They start destroying each other in the dark while Gideon looks on safely from the hills.
So this story isn't offering the reader tips for discerning God's will.
No, it's about God's commitment to use weak people with deep flaws to do more than they could have imagined.
Okay, so short scenes, like Gideon in the fleece, are combined with other scenes making up a larger plot line. And tracing the conflict and resolution through the plot helps you see the message the author's trying to get across.
Now, Gideon's story has been set alongside many other stories that are also about these flawed, often questionable leaders called judges. And each of these has its own internal plot line. But then altogether they make up a whole movement of the biblical story, the period of the judges, and that has its own unified plot line.
And there are many movements within the story of the Bible.
Exactly. And all the smaller stories, hundreds of them, they fit within the context of their own movements. And then these movements together make up the building blocks of the grand plotline of the whole story of the Bible.
So no matter where I'm reading in the Bible, I need to pay attention to these different layers of plot so I can read each story in context.
Exactly. The Bible is such a sophisticated piece of literature. And so all these smaller plot lines keep overlapping, building up the tension. And when you back up, you can see how they've all been woven together into the unified story that leads to Jesus.
Let me try to condense their advice down to 3 things to look for, okay? So when you are reading a story, a narrative, when you're reading like an individual story, and one of the things that they do well is say, like, stories are within stories are within stories are within stories. So that's important. But when you're looking at an individual account, like one kind of, unified story here, the 3 things you look for are the conflict, the climax, and the resolution. Okay, every story has these in some form. The conflict is essentially the problem that needs to be addressed. If there is no conflict, if there's no problem somewhere in the beginning of the story, it's not really a story. It's just like a list of things. You know what I mean? Like you don't say, I got to find out what happens. This is the thing that makes you say, there's a problem. We got to find a solution. It's what propels somebody into action. Okay. The climax is after some action, okay? So like things happen. We're not gonna get into those parts. There is a turning point. Like there's something that shifts what's going on. Usually it addresses the problem in some way, either by fixing it or showing that it's not really a problem or making it worse. Something happens that turns the corner, okay? It's the climax of the story. And then the resolution is the new situation that results after that. It doesn't mean the whole story's over. It just means that after that climactic moment, you get kind of a new setting, and then usually a new story comes out of that kind of resolution, okay? So when you're reading, if you're like, I get lost in all of these details, I don't know if I'm supposed to pay attention to this or that. If you start by asking for these three things, it kind of gives you your bearings. Because if you've ever been in like, especially like a community group study, and you're reading it and you're like, well, I'm just going to like say that this was interesting. And you're like, I don't know if that's important or not. This will tell you kind of the main line of the thing before you get into all those like, well, what about this? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to practice this. We're going to practice it on the book of Ruth, and we're going to read the entire book of Ruth. Okay, guys, this is really exciting. A whole book of the Bible. But here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to assign to each of the tables here a different chapter of the book of Ruth. Each of the chapters are roughly kind of one of these stories where there is a conflict, a climax, and a resolution. And I'm going to have you identify it for that chapter of the book, what the conflict, climax, and resolution is. If you're online, I'll just let you pick whatever chapter you want to do. You can just kind of, pick a number 1 through 4 and see how it goes. But let me give you just a little bit of context for Ruth, okay? And actually the whole evening has kind of been context for Ruth, because here's the first verse. In the days when the judges ruled. So you already know a bit of what that would be like. Would you want to live in the days when the judges ruled? No, you would not, okay? And so you should be walking into this story expecting certain kinds of things. You know what the era of the judges was, so if we're getting another story from that time, you kind of know how it's going to feel. Or do you? Okay? So this is the expectation you should have going in. But see what the author does with it. Okay? So in your section, I want you to identify those three things. The conflict, which is the problem. The climax, the turning point. The resolution, the new results that come. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do for the tables here. I'm going to say chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And let's say, hey, if you're online, do chapter 4. Or pick your own. It's all right. I'm not going to look over your shoulder. All right. Oh, and I realize if you're not in chapter 1, you're picking up the story midway through, just do your best. All right? Just do your best. Go ahead and wrap up whatever comments you're making. All right, and here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to have you tell me the story. So we're going to start with those of you who did chapter 1. I want to hear. Let's hear what the conflict is in chapter 1. What's the problem that needs to be solved? I hear someone saying something.
Naomi is trying to send the daughters back.
Okay. Give me a little bit of what happens before that. Why is she sending her daughters away?
Because the husbands have passed.
Okay.
She can't produce any more.
Okay, so here's Naomi's problem, okay? Naomi is kind of the first main character here. Her sons have died, and now her daughters-in-law, who are not Israelites, they have no husbands. And Naomi's saying, you can't stick around with me because I'm not having any more babies to give you another husband. And like, are you really going to wait around for that? Okay, so she is trying to send her daughters away. Why? Because that's like a prudent thing to do. Like, if you've got no husband, you should go back to your family if you're a woman in the ancient world. So that's the problem. They have no husbands, and she has no sons. Okay? So that's a scary thing. You might not feel that in the modern world, but in the ancient world, that is a terrifying predicament for all three of those women. In the story, that's the problem. So what's the climax of the chapter? What's like the turning point that changes this? Someone from a group that did chapter 1. Ruth insists on staying. Now, here's what's bizarre about this. Ruth is from Moab. Now, you've gotten a little tour here, so you know something about this. You know who else was from Moab? King Eglon, the guy with the fat and the poop, okay? Like this guy. So when you are thinking in the time of the judges, and you hear about Moab, you do not think, oh, it's not like hearing about Canadians. Oh, they're so nice. You know what I mean? Like so this is the country that you're at war with. These are the people that invade. These are the people that if you read the Old Testament, there's a long history of really just terrible things between these two countries. And someone from Moab is not going to be welcomed in. In fact, God is like, you be very careful about marrying Moabites because they've led my people astray. So this is not like you do not look at Ruth and say, oh yeah, I expect her to be the hero. Okay, but But she says, she doesn't just say, I'm going to stay with Naomi. Listen to what she says, okay? Verse 16 here. Ruth says, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. I know that I'm marked by the fact that I'm from Moab, but your people are going to be my people. I'm not with them anymore. I'm with you guys now. Your God will be my God. And where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. Now, we don't think too much about that, but that, like in the ancient world, to say I'm going to be buried in the land of my family, like to be gathered to your fathers is a way of saying you died and were buried because you go to be with your family. Saying where you die, I will die. That's where I'm going to be buried. I'm going to be with you. You're my family now. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. And that's when Naomi says, you can come with me. So the turning point of this story, you got these three women that are alone. And one of the women says, I'm going to take the prudent path and go back to my family. And another one takes the risky path and says, because I want to be a part of your people and I want to be connected with your God, I will stay connected with you. I'm going to be loyal to you as long as I live. This is a very unexpected thing. And so at the end of the chapter, what's the resolution? Three women start off alone. One makes a vow of loyalty. What condition are they in at the end? Doesn't have to be dramatic. They're starting a new beginning. Okay? So they're together. They're in Bethlehem, and they're starting a new life together. So we don't know where this is going, but the table has the play has been set, right? So let's see what happens to these two women who have made this kind of vow to each other. Like this really profound, like this is conversion for Ruth. Like your God is my God, and I'm with you. And it does, and there's no guarantee. This is totally risky. Like think the disciples following Jesus and being like, I'm leaving it all behind. All my security, I'm going with you. Okay, so this is chapter 1. Let's look at chapter 2. Okay. I was supposed to click through all these. I had this really great PowerPoint plan. All right, chapter 2. What's the conflict at the beginning of chapter 2? What problem is there? One of the groups that did 2. They don't have food. They've got each other, right? There's love between a mother and a daughter-in-law, but love won't, put food on the table, right? We got no food. 2 women, no land, no food. What are we going to do? All right, what's the climax of this chapter? They go to figure out the food thing, but what kind of turning point happens? One of the tables that did 2. Yeah. Okay, so they meet this guy named Boaz, and so here's the thing. All right, foreign woman with no resources, no network, shows up in town. And she does what is somewhat normal in that time. She goes to a field and basically begs for scraps. Like there's this practice called gleaning, where if someone's doing it right, they'll say, yeah, hey, you don't have any food, you can come and whatever. But Ruth knows that if the owner of this field finds me here and doesn't want me here, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm out. And so there is this very tense moment when Boaz, the owner of the field, the guy who apparently has done fairly well for himself. Like he's got a lot of people working in his field. This is more than just like his little family. Like this is kind of like a big thing going on. He sees her and asks the workers, who is she? Oh, Moabite. Oh, okay. So we know what's happening. Ruth is cringing. And then Boaz does something really unexpected. The climactic moment is in verse 11. Chapter 2, Boaz replied, I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people that you did not know before. It's going back to this initial act of loyalty. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And then Ruth says, okay, so does that mean this is okay? Like, will I find favor in your eyes? And he says, you can come anytime you want. You actually come and work with the women of my household, and you can gather as much stuff as you want. So you get this climactic moment where Boaz says, I know you're from Moab, but you have demonstrated something faithful and good that I don't see very often. And that inspires me. And so I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do, which is say, you're in need, my field is yours. Here's the thing. So in our community here, you often hear us talk about business owners, right? A lot of people who own a business or whatever, and we'll Jim or I will make comments about that. If you want to study a small business owner who does things right, Boaz is your guy, because he's essentially running a small farming business. And he's looking at through the lens of the kingdom of God. He's saying, what does it look like for God's people to interact with the world the right way and the resources we have? And he sees this poor, desperate woman from another place and says, come on in, I got more than enough. It's really amazing. It's this attitude that he's saying, all right, here's the situation, I'm going to do it. What's the resolution to that situation? What's the new situation created by that? Ruth and Naomi have food, right? For now. Okay? See this, it's still a precarious situation. Like Ruth and Naomi still have no network, no people. They've found one nice person who at the moment seems like he's going to provide. But that's not a permanent solution. If you've ever been in a situation where a crisis has happened in your life, and someone is helping you out in that crisis, okay, I feel secure right now. They're bringing me meals, or they're paying my bill, or whatever. It might give you a chance to breathe, but it's not your destination. Because if you're stuck there, you're still you're always wondering, how long is this going to last? Is it going to, they could kick me out at any time, or it could run out, or whatever. And so it's not a permanent solution. So we get to chapter 3. Chapter 3, those of you who did it, what is the problem? What's the conflict here at the beginning? Yeah, Ruth needs a home. She needs to be provided for. She needs protection. She does not have the permanent solution to this. Naomi doesn't either. In ancient terms, she has no husband. She's got no father. She's got no husband. And if you're a woman in that society, whatever we think of that, those are your options in that society. And so, nothing. So, to go off and try to solve this, what is the climactic moment? What's the turning point for that problem? Yeah. Okay, so Boaz finds her laying at his feet. Now this needs some explaining, all right? So Naomi's like, hey, Ruth, why don't you go? It's nighttime. Boaz is over there. And why don't you approach him? And let's see how he responds to this. So she comes up and she lays down at his feet. And Boaz wakes up and finds her. And essentially what happens is Ruth proposes in marriage. This is what's going on. Now, there's all sorts of cultural context, some of which we understand, some of which we're just guessing at, okay, about what some of these gestures mean. But she's essentially coming to him in a vulnerable way, saying, I need you to help. I need a permanent solution. Will you marry me? Now, he agrees. But here's the thing you have to understand. This is the cultural part that is a little weird. There's this idea called the kinsman redeemer, or sometimes it's called the guardian redeemer. Okay, this is a system that God set up. That's very different from what we do, but it in the ancient world, it's brilliant. It's like this genius system for taking care of people who are in need. So what God did is when He gave Israel the land, He split it up between all the families of Israel to say, your family will have land to work forever. So, one generation may mess things up, but the next generation is still going to have that land so that everybody has some capital to build off of for their generation so that they can provide for themselves and their family. And the problem was this. If one generation messed up, like in your family, if one generation made bad business deals or there was a famine and their crops didn't grow or whatever, then they might get to a place where they're like, the only resource I have is the land, which I need to sell to somebody. But if you sell it to somebody, all of a sudden, the next generation, okay, so you lose the land and it sucks for you, but you screwed up, or something bad happened to you. But your children and their children and everybody after that is also going to be doomed to the fate that you're experiencing. So the system was this. System was, we want to keep the land as close to the family that it belongs to as possible. And so God said, the nearest relative is going to be responsible if they've got enough money to buy it back, to pay off the debt, to get the land back. They're called to do that, to buy it back for their brother, essentially, or for their nephew or whoever who is supposed to have that land now. Like what you have is a redeemer, which we use that word in worship songs all the time, but like culturally, this is where the idea comes from. It's the person who buys back something that has been lost. And so Boaz is one of the near relatives of the dead husbands. So the dead husbands, Ruth's husband and Naomi's other son, like if they had lost their land, then Boaz is one of the people who is kind of in line to say, if you need someone to buy this back and make sure we have it, I'm going to do it for you. That's a costly thing, right? Like if you're the redeemer, you're going to have to shell out some money to get your family land back for your brother. Not even for yourself. You're not going to work it, but it's your family, so you do it, right? So the other part that goes with this is something, it's called levirate marriage. If the brother who dies also has a wife, well, it's one thing to get the land for their children. You also have to take care of the woman who has been left helpless in this society. And so it sounds bizarre to us, but it actually was a profoundly merciful and compassionate thing to say the brother in the family is also going to marry the wife and make sure that she's provided for. Now, in this case, that means marrying a Moabite who also comes with a mother-in-law who is also in need, which means that whoever does this is going to be taking care of 2 extra dependents. And so for Boaz to meet Ruth, it's not like sometimes you get this story told as like she batted her eyes and it's like, oh, she was so lovely and she had such good character and he fell in love and he wanted her. That's very, very modern. Now there might have been some of that. Obviously he admired her. There were things that he looked at her and said, you are a woman of noble character. But what was going on there is more than that. He was saying, this is a person in need and I have a calling to be faithful in a way that's very clear in the Torah. It's very clear in the Bible what we're supposed to do. And as a person who wants to do right, I'm going to take responsibility for my relative's wife and the land that he has. And that also usually meant providing an heir, not for yourself, but for your brother. So that you would have a child, and some of your land that you now have from your brother and yourself would go to your brother's heir. So there's all sorts of costs that Boaz is taking on in doing this. The climactic turning point here is an act of sacrificial service, faithfulness to God and care for the poor. What's the resolution to this? Where does this leave Ruth and Boaz and so on? Those of you who did chapter 3. Yeah, so here first he provides some food. He says, here, like fill up the, hold out this big piece of fabric. I'm going to send you with just like this huge engagement present, right? But first he says this. He says, actually, I'm not the first in line to be the redeemer. Someone else has that responsibility before me. And essentially it's like his shot to take on the land if he wants to work it, which is going to make him some money, but also the responsibility, right? So he says, I got to go to that person first. So he's going to do it right. Like he could have just taken it. So I'm going to do that. But he's saying, I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to follow the law. I'm going to go by the commands. And so he says, I'm going to go to the first person in line who's supposed to be responsible for this. We're going to ask him about that. This is where we get to chapter 4. What is the problem, the conflict in chapter 4? Well, there's the person who's the first in line. And the first in line, you got to ask, like, what do they want the land? Could potentially, the first in line could say, I want that. But here's the thing. The first in line is like, oh, land. That sounds nice. Guy died and this land's just sitting there and I got first claim on it. Yeah, I'll go for that. And then Boaz, he's a good guy, but he's shrewd, man, because he's like, yeah, there's some choice land over there. You want it? Oh yeah. Comes with a Moabite, and so then the guy's like, I don't know if I can afford that anymore. So the guy backs off. Essentially what the first redeemer does is he realizes, if I have to take care of this widow and the other widow and potentially produce an heir that's going to take some of the property I've now gained, that doesn't sound too exciting to me. And so it kind of highlights the fact that Boaz is making a sacrificial choice when he's doing this. So what's the climax? What's the turning point?
But also for that conflict, it puts Ruth back in that same boat of wondering how long it's going.
Yes.
Solution, now it's gone.
Yes, it puts in question, like, is there a solution that's going to come? Is this too much? Yeah. So what's the turning point? Boaz is like, yes! Like, that's the turning point. He's like, let's do it. He makes a deal and redeems the land. It costs him something. He takes on the responsibility. And then the resolution. Now, this is the key, because this is the resolution for the whole book. What is the new situation created by this whole sequence of events? What happens? Those of you who did chapter 4. What was that? Oh, so you're skipping way ahead. Jesus' bloodline. Let's just start with this. There's a baby. There's a baby, okay? So a little preview. I'm preaching this one on Christmas. So there's a baby in the story. Turns out it's the wrong baby. But still, it's kind of close. Not Christmas Eve, on Christmas Day. I'll tell you about that later. Okay, so here's what happens. Boaz marries Ruth. And Ruth has a baby, which means the family line that had died out is now continues. Naomi, who at the beginning is without sons, without husband, without anybody, is holding her grandson in her arms. She starts the book saying, I went away full and I came back empty. And now her arms are full. And all because this Moabite, who should not have been loyal to her, was loyal to her. And all because of this man who could have refused to do the sacrificial thing, who could have ignored someone in need, and no one would have batted an eye. It's the time of the judges. People are not like, holding you to a high standard. If that hadn't happened, this baby would not be there. Naomi would be in sorrow, be alone. Now here's the really crazy thing about this. The book ends with the genealogy, which to us is not exciting, because it's a list of names we don't know. But if you learn how to read a genealogy in the Old Testament, you find out that they're actually very well crafted. They usually include a certain number of names, often 10, and the 7th item is usually kind of important, and the final item is usually important. So this is what you get. It tells a little story if you know how to read it. Okay, 7 generations, and then it says, Salmon was the father of Boaz. And you're like, oh, Boaz. The climactic turning point of this story, right, is Boaz. And what's the resolution that results? The final thing? Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David, King David. So here's what we've got. This is why you put Judges and Ruth together, all right? You've got the book of Judges that tells you mostly what it was like during that time, and it's not good. And you realize it's fallen apart. And then you get this story that zooms in on this little place. It's just a farm. This is not the guys fighting the battles. There is no one confronting any Moabite, king. There's no one fighting off the Midianites. There's no one killing Philistines. You zero in on this little farm with a poor foreign woman and her widow mother-in-law and this man who's just going about his business. And he makes a simple choice. Now, it's sacrificial. I've emphasized that. But when it comes down to it, it is an ordinary choice. A situation was presented. He did not know where this was going. All he knew is there's a woman in need, and I know what the Torah says. I know what God commands. And so I'm going to honor the fact that this woman has connected herself to my people and my God, and I'm going to care for her the way I'm supposed to, the way God cared for my people when we were slaves in Egypt. I'm going to do for her what needs to be done. And it's that simple act of sacrificial faithfulness that he didn't know where it was going to go, and it produces King David. The point of that story is to say the real heroes are the ordinary people who trust God enough to obey him. The ordinary people who loyally love the people around them when they're in need. Like, these are the acts. When you say, what is really going to make a difference? Did any of the judges solve the real problem that Israel had during the time of the judges? No. But there was a woman who came in from Moab and met a man who was loyal and faithful, and their grandson solved the problem of the book of Judges. This is more than a romance story. This is a rescue story. This is the establishment of the kingdom. Okay. I was going to finish with the Bible Project video about the book of Ruth, but we're a little bit over. And Dave told me I was going to go over, and I want to not have him rub it in my face, okay? So here's what I'm going to, it's a good summary of the book of Ruth. It's beautiful. You know that the Bible Project guys always get it right. So when we send out the kind of follow-up email to this, I'll just send a link to it. It's worth 5 minutes of your time. It's a good kind of cap on all that we've talked about here. But here's where I want to finish. First, I want to ask you a question, okay? This is something we're kind of always asking around here at Christ Community. We're always asking the question, what's your next step, okay? When you come to a class like this, it's great. You finish up and you're like, I did that. But we always want to be people saying, is there something more for me? Is there something next for me? And so we're going to ask the question, what do you need to do next? Maybe there was something here that inspired you to say, I need to do X, Y, Z. Maybe God's leading you in some way. Maybe this is just a moment to reflect on that. We have what we call a discipleship guide. It's a guide to helping people find their next step here at the church. And we're going to send that out to you in a follow-up email. I want to ask you to take 2 minutes of your time just to look at that. Because even if you're already connected someplace here at Christ Community, even just a moment of reflection of saying, what are the other things that are going on, might open up something where God says, you know what? Now's the time to do this. Now's the time to do that. You always want to be open, not just stuck doing the thing that you're doing, always following the lead of the Holy Spirit. So that's going to be in your email inbox right after this. We're going to send it to you. The next thing before you go is you're going to receive in that same email a survey to give feedback about this. Tell me what was good. Tell me what was bad. Tell me what was, you would do differently. I love that feedback because it helps us improve, okay? I'm going to end with a joke and a prayer, all right? So this is from Dave here. He handed this to me. He says, what type of man was Boaz before he got married? Ruthless. Oh! All right, there you go. Let's pray. Let's pray. Father, we are so thankful that you stick with your people even when we're really messed up. And that the story probably should have ended a long time ago when we left the garden. But you are patient over and over and over again. And we see in the book of Judges what is true even of our own life. We get stuck in patterns that we ought to get out of. And yet you still hear our cries for help. God, forgive us for spurning your faithfulness and turning to false gods and trying to find rescue from someone other than you. God, here's what we know. We know that we are not good enough. We cannot be our own saviors. We cannot rescue ourselves. We need you. And so, God, we thank you that you sent your Son to be the King that we needed, to be the one who could come and rescue. Jesus, you are the one we've been looking for, who breaks the cycle, who sets us free, who truly redeems. Jesus, you are Boaz to us. You are the one who sacrificially takes on our need when you didn't have to. And you welcome us in and you make us family and you make us fruitful. You weave us into your story. And so God, we pray that you would make us a little bit more like Ruth, a little bit more like Boaz. People who even in a culture and a time that rejects you, that we would be faithful. That we would cling to you as our God and your people as our people. God, make us those kind of people who love and are loyal, who care for people in need, who obey even when it's hard, who are faithful and hopeful. God, thank you for speaking to us in your word. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Go in peace.